Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back to the eastern wing of the Stink Bug Works. I have cut a hole in my aft hatch and have installed the template. I have installed the motor temporarily. Tell you what I got here. You see I put a bunch of bend in that. This motor mount has a nice curve to that. It's going to glue down to this curve and get the right shape. But this is kind of where I'm going. Figured out I had to angle these to give room for the headers to come out. In fact, the headers came out at a bit of an angle, and I had to do some sanding to bring them up close to vertical. Originally, the headers were intended to go under, and I flipped them to go over. So they're not 100% right, but they're close enough. And it looks like I have to make a little box to clear the servo here. So I'll show you what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. So I've got a box that covers the servo mount, but not enough of the servo itself. So my plan is going to be this. I'm going to take a little piece of plywood, and build a deck on this box I've got here. And then I'm going to cut away in there enough for the servo, and I'm going to glue a balsa block on there, and I'm going to sand and carve this balsa block to, because remember, this has to keep water out of here. So this whole thing has to be watertight against here. So in theory, this whole engine compartment could fill up with water. And, you know, there might be enough water splashing back here that it could fill up. But that's just going to be the way of the world. And you'll when you pull the hatch off, you'll dump the water. I'm not going to be driving this thing crazy enough to do that. This is going to be a cruiser. Think Big B's Sport Fisher. Not going to set any speed records, but it looks cool cruising around the lake. So that's where we are on that. So I have some more epoxying to do. The epoxy on here is still kind of green. And so this all gets sanded down, and I'll build some sort of balsa enclosure around there. And I think I can pretty much clear all the motor components. So there you go, the motor mount. Bingo. What do you think? Now, another couple of things. I showed you this tool a long time ago, and many of you may not have seen it. This is a cool tool, and I'll bet you can get them at Harbor Freight. If not, you can find them anywhere. It's called a nibbler, and it has this little hardened steel jaw with an angle here and a little step in it, and it nibbles. It nibbles metal, it nibbles plastic, it nibbles wood. So you just put it in there and it takes a little bite and takes another little bite. And you can just keep going. There's a tight fit with wood, but so it's perfect when you have a hole to cut out of a piece of wood that you don't want to destroy. A nibbler is a cool way, and the cool thing about a nibbler is you can get right up to a line and then, come down on the other side a little bit and get right up to that line again. I can go down just a little bit more. Bingo. And so it's really nice for cutting out real close to a line, and then you can get the rest of it with a piece of sandpaper. Or my favorite sanding block. Where is my favorite sanding block? I don't see it. It gets oh, here it is. My favorite sanding block, this little itty bitty tiny sanding block that you can get into little tiny places. Arg, I've got me cloth, Jolly Roger. And they give you instructions how to crumple it up and make it all wavy and such. So that's pretty cool. So I have a cloth Jolly Roger, and what you got to do is you got to put fabric glue on it before you cut it out, otherwise it'll fray. And you take the white part and you glue it around your mast, and then you crumple it and you stretch it, and you put clear fabric adhesive on it to keep it from fraying. And what do you think? Jolly Roger? We're going on the pirate theme, boys and girls. So every day it's getting closer and closer. You know, there's a lot of time involved in all these little details. Like building this tray, you know, this is all epoxy, and it all takes forever to set up, and it's a pain in the neck. I should have CA'd it and then painted it over, but I just don't like doing that. I don't think it's strong enough. I like epoxy holding everything together. Finally, Big B had an issue with bolts slopping around in holes. And I can understand that completely. Let me tell you what we did with the F5B gliders, and in fact the pylon racers too. And whether or not this would work with what he's doing, I don't know. But here's what we did. For the ailerons, we had a servo out on the wing and then just a short wire with a Z-bend at each end, mainly just to save weight and save complexity and such. Well, those Z-bends would have a little bit of slop in the servo arm, so we just put a drop of CA glue right there where the Z-bend goes through the servo arm. And, you know, you let it cook off, and then you actuate the servo. And the first thing it does is it breaks the glue joint, because CA doesn't really stick to metal that well. And especially if the metal has oil from your fingers or something on it, you know, you've got to clean metal real well before the CA is going to stick. So the secret with the ailerons is don't clean them. And what wound up happening is eventually you'd be riding on a CA bearing. And if it ever got sloppy, you just put another drop of CA on it. There you go. So, where you've got a bolt going through a metal bracket, and that bolt has a few thousandths, because that's all it needs is a couple of thousandths play in that hole. And then this part that, you know, you got a couple thousandths play here, this thing's moving, 6 inches. So you may take that F5B aileron idea and adapt it somehow to, the screws in there. You might use thick CA, like spray your bolt with WD-40, wipe it off, and then put thick CA on it, put it into the hole. And when you go to get it out, just tighten, pull the nut off and tighten the screw, and it's going to destroy all that CA, and it won't phase the metal at all. So just a thought, just a way, because poor Big B, he was struggling trying to get this, do I have any up there? plumbing tape. Yeah, this stuff right here is trying to get this Teflon tape onto a bolt. And it was, because it's small, little tiny things. And trust me, I know how hard it is dealing with little tiny things. But it's an idea. You might want to try that. I don't have much else to report. It's kind of slow going with the epoxy, but I'll be building up this little servo cover box. And I think what I have to do is, you see my motor mount right here, and then it gets a donut below it, and then it gets the other mount that goes into the frame rails that are over there in the epoxy station, and the frame rails are going to go along here. Well, this one's going to end here. And I have to be able to position these things. What I want to do is put the motor in place and have the mounts on the motor temporarily, and then position these frame rails to contact these mounts, because they're going to glue on the side. These frame rails are going to come up and glue that way onto the mounts, and then glue down here. So I I essentially have to have this end plate off, because I need to be able to get in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off this whole thing with the exception of the end plate. And then I'm going to paint it. Yeah, I'm going to have to do all that. I'm going to have to paint it and all that. And then glue in the frame rails, and then glue in the other end here that's already been painted, and boom, I'll glue them in, because I want the rails to be wood. I want it to be that mahogany. So I've got to paint this before I put the wood down. Otherwise, the wood gets painted, and what's the point of having the wood there in the first place? Could have just used anything. So this will get painted and go on last. And then this whole assembly will get glued up into here. Now, one of the things is the location of this in this direction. I have to be able to get the vibration damper that goes on down here. I have to be able to get it out. So the motor bolts in here. It's going to come up and out. I might have to waller out that screw hole a little bit, and so the motor can slide up, and then... oh, there's an idea. There's an idea. I could make that a slot, put the motor in, and then drop it down. Oh, boys and girls, I'm inventing stuff right here. I'll put a slot. No, I put a slot in here, and it's going to leak water. Forget that. It has to be watertight. We'll come up with some other plan. Oh, I know how to solve the watertight thing. Just put a piece of tape on it. Bingo, it's watertight. Okay, that's what I'll do. I'll make a slot that drops in, and that way the motor mount pins will drop into the motor mount. Everything will go vertical. I don't have to worry about tipping angles and getting things in, like this part. So there you go. I've been rambling on a long time on this video. Until next time, jet out.